Howdy, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem. This episode features Chris Allen, a contributor for 4for4 Fantasy Football, Football Guys, and NBC Sports Edge. He's a writer, podcaster, and weather guru. It was a blast talking with Chris about home brewing, being a Bengals fan, coming from a year-round sports family, being a minority in the fantasy football space, who he'd want as a celebrity co-host, and much more. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisAllenFFWX. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at TheCaseyKasem, as well as the podcast at GetReal_pod. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. A little housekeeping before we head into this episode. You know this podcast is a few episodes in, and there's no monetization of this pod at all, at least at the moment. Mostly that lies on me, since I can barely put a show out, let alone find sponsors. So for now, if you could just help spread the word on this podcast by sharing on social media, I would be more appreciative than you even know. And with that out of the way, here's my conversation with Chris Allen. You just got back from your son's soccer game. How exciting was that today?
It was actually, I mean, it's I don't know how fun, how exciting, how excited do you really get watching a bunch of like 6 and 7 year olds like run around, just like huddle around a ball for a little bit.
Right.
If anything, like between me and my wife, like my wife is the one that's typically the the couch coach, right? Like she's the one on the sidelines, yelling, go get the ball or hustle or, all the other stuff. Whereas that me, I'm just more of the quiet, when they come over to the side of the, I'll be like, hey, go do this, switch that up or whatever. So we try to tag team their development, like throughout sports, like kind of in that manner, because she's always more outspoken than myself. So I just kind of let her do her thing. And then, when we get home or on the weekends or, any other sort of time we've got a chance to do it, I'll be like, try this or do this or whatever. So it's not as, in the moment type of thing. Let the kids be kids and then we figure it out afterwards.
So when you were growing up, how was your relationship with sports? Did you play sports? Did you watch sports?
Yeah, it just depends on like which sport you're talking about. But like both my parents were in the military. Like my mom up until like she had me and my sister and all that, and she was discharged. But they kept us constantly in sports. I mean, if it wasn't basketball, it was soccer. If it wasn't soccer, it was baseball. Like we were typically like those like year-round like type of sports, like the sports family, where Saturdays and Sundays we were always at some ball field doing something. And since we went to a private school, once my dad was stationed here in Ohio, like we basically just got in with the same crowd like at our church. And I was basically coming up with the same kids. Like we were always playing like the same sports together, always on the same team, unless like some of them went off and played select ball or something like that. But it was just like the same group with the same parents and all of that, pretty much all throughout grade school and up and throughout most of high school. But even then it was like, football. I got into golf for a hot minute because my parents were like adamant that I try it out. And then since I showed like some, I don't know, mediocrity at playing it for like a 16, 17-year-old kid, and I looked like Tiger Woods at the time, so it kind of fit. They were like, oh yeah, so try it for the golf team. I did not make the high school golf team. I was not that good. But no, I think like I was in sports throughout pretty much like my entire like childhood, but I never really, I guess, appreciated sports like for what they were and like how much they actually help you develop like as even not necessarily as an adult, but I think understanding what the rigors that goes into like practicing all the time and like all the things that as a kid you're always like, I don't want to, I don't want to get up and do this. I don't want to my sister and I, we were actually just talking about this the other day, reminiscing about having to take swim lessons when we were stationed down in Alabama, and it'd be like 50 degrees outside and the water was just like ice cold and, you never wanted to get out and do it. So like all of those, just horror stories that you remember as a kid, but now it's just like, yeah, I'm going to get my kids, I'm going to get them out there and go do these things that I had to go experience because it's good for them in the long run. At least you think so.
Yeah. I mean, same way growing up. So I feel you on that. And when you were growing up, did you have a sports team or sports teams that you enjoyed watching or did you have any fandom like that?
No, and actually that's been kind of the odd part about my, I guess, journey into writing fantasy content was because as a military kid, I never had any allegiance to any team because I was never in a city long enough to really attach myself to the town's culture. I think the closest that I ever got, I wrote about this like a couple of times. The closest I ever got was when my dad was stationed at Tinker Air Force Base, so Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And the closest we got was everybody there was Dallas Cowboys fans. And that was in what, 90, it was like 90, it was probably like 93, 94, I think somewhere in that, like early to mid 90s, where it was like Emmitt Smith.
Yep.
I mean, just their offensive line was just historic. Troy Aikman. Yep. My mom got me a Dallas Cowboys starter jacket. And I wore that thing religiously. Like when we came up here to Ohio, I was wearing it all the time. I was like, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan because I lived in Oklahoma and all this other stuff. Because in Dayton, Ohio, like, what do we have? Like, we don't have anything here in Southwest Ohio other than like the Bengals at the time, which were okay, but they were never on the same level as Dallas was. So it was just until I went to college in Cincinnati. Went to UC for about 5 years for undergrad. That was the first time I ever lived in a town with a professional sports team. And then I got kind of indoctrinated into being a Bengals fan. And 20 years later, I'm sitting at a bar in Cincinnati watching my team go to the Super Bowl. Even though we lost, but still, I mean, it's just one of those things where you just never know where life is going to kind of take you. And without having an allegiance as a kid, it just really kind of helped me appreciate it even more now as an adult, because I felt and I was really emotional about everything that happened for Cincinnati this past year. I'm still excited for the team. I mean, disappointed we lost, obviously, but still, it's just one of those things where, again, like you really do start to appreciate it more once you become an adult.
For sure. And like, yeah, I mean, it was so amazing to see their story and how they got to where they were to get to the Super Bowl and everything. It was great. And, leaving the Cowboys in the past is probably a good thing, because you'd still be waiting for another Super Bowl. Like,
yeah.
Like you said about not appreciating it when you were a kid. I didn't appreciate the Cowboys winning Super Bowls when I was a kid, like I probably should have. So now that I'm an adult, I'm like, I wish I was just a little bit older when that happened. So when you found yourself involved with fantasy football, was playing fantasy football your first fantasy sport to play, or did you have any other experience with fantasy sports before then?
Yeah, it was my first time. It was just like 10 years ago was the first time I ever played any sort of fantasy sports. I had gotten a new job. First few weeks on the job, meeting the new crew as a young engineer, working with a bunch of technicians and all that, and the discussion of starting a fantasy football league came up. And they were like, yeah, hey, new guy, would you want to join the league or whatever? And I was like, well, I've never done it before. Absolutely. They're like, great, you're the commissioner. So I had to learn all the parts and pieces of, setting up an ESPN fantasy league for a bunch of casual folks isn't the hardest thing to do, but having never done it before, having really never experienced or even knowing what the expectations were for setting up a league, I try and dive in as much as possible so folks are having fun. I'm sending emails to people asking them, well, what settings should we have? How many of this? How many of that? How many bench slots? And just learning all the things. And I was horrible at it. I'm not that much better now, but at least I have a better understanding of the things that go into actually drafting a squad, managing it throughout the season, like so on and so forth. But I remember sitting in my garage with 10, 15 other people, because some folks brought their spouses, and doing a live draft. I picked Ray Rice with my first pick. This was in 2012, I believe, was the first year that we did that league. And the rest is kind of history from there. But yeah, it took losing for a number of years and not really understanding, well, what really goes into it, and just my general competitive nature to try and figure out, what really goes into fantasy football. And I started listening to more podcasts. I started, and then just getting the general understanding of the game. I was like, I have just a general inclination of analyzing data with my technical background. And I think I could, I'm a pretty decent writer. I've done a number of technical publications for engineering journals, science journals, and things of that nature. So I think I might be able to do this, and kind of the rest is history after that.
So with the technical background, can you explain exactly what the technical background you have is for the people that are listening?
Yeah. So I've been an engineer for 10, 15 years now. I guess I graduated, not to date myself, but I graduated back in like 2006. But I have my master's in mechanical engineering, structural mechanics background, modeling and simulation. And I spent a number of years working for the government as a contractor. Did a bunch of let's see, how many different jobs do I have, or at least like different roles I have. But basically, I was a lead engineer, project engineer for the Air Force, like working alongside the government, planning out projects, executing them with my knowledge of either modeling and simulation, but then also I got some hands-on training installing like sensors, so like thermocouples, strain gauges, things of that nature on structures, and being able to take the information we get from the sensors that we install and figure out, okay, well, this is what's happening to the structure itself. That was one piece. And now I'm actually a full-time civilian. I work for the Air Force, so this is kind of like my side gig. But work for the Air Force now full-time in their non-destructive evaluation lab as a program manager. So for the folks that don't know, non-destructive evaluation basically means we can evaluate or figure out what's going on with the airplane without having to like cut it up or anything like that. Yeah, so using sensors that don't harm or destroy or destruct the structure, that's essentially the goal, so that we can continue to figure out what's going on with airplanes, repair them as need be without spending like a whole bunch of money. So that's my new role as a civilian now.
Okay, awesome. See, this is why you guys should talk to your friends more, because I've known Chris through this social media fun fest for a while, but I didn't know that because I don't ask questions. So, this podcast is kind of just a disguise for me to actually like have the courage to talk to my friends. So
and I'm a hermit, and I'm a hermit outside of like once we get into the actual season. And so outside of once with like August, September, I'm normally like off doing other stuff, whether it's actually, catching up on TV shows that I put off for the season, or, like hanging out with the kids. So typically I don't put that stuff out there, but yeah, I mean, it has been a fun career for me so far. And I've really enjoyed getting a chance to learn as much as possible about what's out there, like on the aircraft and aerospace side of things, considering the, kind of going from a lab space type of environment to now being able to see things actually out at the depots and like actual aircrafts and all that. So it's actually really interesting getting to see the big picture.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. Okay. Now I'm like having like a little fangirl moment because I'm like, dang, man, so, okay. So let's go back to, so when you were in school and, did you start playing? I'm trying to get the timeline straight. I can't keep track of timelines to save my life. But so did you start playing fantasy football after you had graduated?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It was like while I was out working as a contractor with a bunch of other like engineers and technicians. And gosh, now I'll be 39 this year. So I was probably like 29, 30 years old, like when I first started playing fantasy football. Okay. And yeah, I mean, that's when I started. I didn't actually start writing, or I guess producing fantasy content, I guess is like the formal term for whatever it is that we do here, until I was like 35. Yeah, around that time frame. So yeah.
So like a grandpa in today's terms of
pretty much. Yeah. And that's the other thing. That's the other part that's wild about this industry that we're in, is that it is like it becomes really I guess obvious what type of age groups that we're dealing with when you see how people talk, when you see how people act like on social media, like in their videos, like not in a bad way or anything like that, but you can almost instantly and just even the vocabulary that some folks use, but it's still an ageless sport, or still an ageless industry. Like we've got folks from, I mean, obviously like Matthew Berry, like all the way up at the top. I mean, Scott Fish. I mean, like folks that have been in this industry, like Bob Harris. I mean, folks that have been in this industry for decades that can tell you just stories of them drafting players that have been in and out of the league for a long, long time. And it's just, there's so much knowledge and history about just not even just like fantasy football, but just football in general, that I think still gets captured in fantasy football. I mean, shoot, I bet you Scott Fish could probably talk rhapsodic about drafting, I don't know, insert like Peyton Manning, he probably had him on like a Devi roster at some point, in the late 90s. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
No,
You know
not
what I'm
at all.
saying?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like Matt Waldman or like, Sigmund Bloom. I mean, those types of guys that have been around and seen so many, I guess, iterations of the league and seen the league evolve, and at the same time watched fantasy football evolve to what it is today. It really trips me out being able to connect with some of those folks, because they can really put all that in perspective. And while I am one of the older folks, it really doesn't matter. And we've kind of seen this. It really doesn't matter like what age you are. It's just, do you have the drive? Do you have the enthusiasm in order to really start to, I guess, contribute like to the industry?
You have the drive and enthusiasm because lots of people are messaging you. But no,
Yeah.
I'm in the same age. I'm older than you, but only by like a tiny hair. And
You don't look a day over 27. What are you talking about?
Well, I am. No, I'm just kidding. I'm 38 actually. So anyway,
I know that. Cool.
Yeah. So okay. So you brought up Scott Fish, and I swear, like every episode I don't know what we're at now, like 12 episodes in a row. So if you're listening to this, Scott, hi, here's another episode with your name in it. But yeah, it is really cool to see like all, and be able to take from all of those people and learn things from all of those people. So when you first found out that, hey, I can do something in the fantasy football industry, how did you figure out like that's a thing I can do?
It's actually funny that that we were just talking about Scott Fish. Like, he was actually one of the first people that I talked to. I think within the first couple of years that I was writing for a free website at the time, Fantasy Football Couch Coach. It's now, I think that's now like done and gone away. But like Terminal Kennedy, Jason, so like he was a writer there. Myself, a couple other folks. And that's where I kind of like, I don't know, cut my teeth on just writing in general and like editing and like just trying to figure out, okay, what goes into actually like writing a football article. And I also had the good fortune of meeting and getting a chance to talk with Matt Harmon. I was in a fantasy league with him when he was still a part of NFL Network. And since I was like a fan of the show, I got picked to be in a league with him. And while we were in the league, like, folks were like chatting left and right. And that's when I came up with the idea for studying how weather impacts fantasy football. Because for the folks who don't know, like my Twitter handle, Chris Allen, FFWX, the WX is for weather. And so I was like, hey, I can probably grab a whole bunch of data, see what the weather impacts are and all that. And so I kind of ran it by Matt, and I sent him my very first article and asked him for any sorts of edits or changes that he would want to see. And, and then things kind of developed from there. But then when I got into podcasting, I had no idea where you could submit any, like your audio, how you get it out there to the masses. And at the time I was working, and I still am working with my buddy, Adam Wilde. His brother, Carl Safchik, who has been around in the Dynasty community for years, he and a couple other folks got us in touch with a small group of folks by Scott Fish, Elliot Christ, and I forget who else was in the DM thread with us. But Scott was like, oh yeah, you guys are wanting to start a Dynasty podcast? Oh, and so I've got a website that can host podcasts. I'll give you the login info. You guys just put your stuff there, publish it, and then it'll submit straight to iTunes. I mean, he hooked us all up. We never had to pay anything. It was just, he's just he didn't know me from Adam, and he was just willing to help us out without even a second thought. And it was just amazing for us to be able to, one, create content, and two, have a spot where it could be hosted without any other issues. So it was all to his credit for being able to help us out like so early on in the process.
And being able to have that connection and the networking and everything like that, how do you, because some people that are starting out in this space aren't sure how to go about getting their content out, or how to go about talking to these, these bigger names than they are at the moment. Mm-hmm. And how do people go about doing that without coming off kind of like, pushy or, overdoing it?
So here's, I guess, two answers to that. But the first one is a story. I happened to be going down to New Orleans, like with my wife, for an anniversary trip. I knew that Sigmund Bloom lived in the area, And again, he didn't know me from anybody. I got his contact information, actually pulled it from the Football Guys website since they have like their emails and stuff like that. I emailed him and said, "Hi, Sigmund. My name's Chris Allen. I've been doing I've written a couple of articles here and there, but I happen to be coming down to New Orleans. Would you be willing to sit down and have a drink with me and my wife, or at the very least be able to tell us, where we can go and hang out and find some good food, good music, and blah, blah, blah." Didn't know him at all. But I asked Harmon, since he also had worked for Football Guys at one point. I was like, "Yeah, would Sigmund respond or something like that?" And he said, "Yeah, probably." Sigmund got back to me within 4 minutes. Like, he didn't know me at all.
Yeah.
He immediately emailed me back with just a list of places to go. And he's like, "Yep, just let me know maybe the week beforehand before y'all get here, and we'll hang out." And we did. But that's all to say that you would be surprised how many folks within the industry would be more than willing to help you out if you ask, and if you ask politely. If you show them the drive, like let's say for a guy like JJ Zacharyson, if you wanted to get his thoughts on building content or putting together a model or writing an article, or even how he produces his shorter form, like late round podcasts and all that, coming up to him or emailing him and saying, "Here, JJ, I'm trying to get some tips on how to produce content. Here's a couple of examples. Like, where do you think I should make changes," or something like that. But if you show interest, if you show that you're willing to listen, and you also have that same drive, you'll get that same energy back like tenfold from all of the big names like in the industry. It's really been, I don't know, kind of jaw dropping, and I'm still starstruck by a number of these guys. Like, it's almost for me to even reach out and ask like JJ or even like Rich Rebar, like, for help. It's almost like, should I DM him? No, I shouldn't DM him. He's not going to answer me. All right, maybe I'll just I'll just ask him like real quick, or Emin Silva, like, insert name here.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many folks like within the industry that are, like I said, that are willing to help. It's just incumbent on you to also show that drive or that initiative to be able to show this person really does want this help. They really are on the right track, and so maybe I can just help them in a little ways. So unless you're minus asking them to just write your stuff for you or anything like that, I mean, they'll always be willing to help. At least that's been my experience.
Right. And with the whole writing thing too, had you ever done writing prior to the article that you wrote about the weather and how the effects of the weather on fantasy football? Was that the first time, or did you have some prior experience writing about other things?
Yeah, definitely prior experience writing about other things. I've been published in Experimental Mechanics. That's a peer-reviewed scientific journal. I actually, and this is, I don't advertise this, and it's not a big deal. I say this before, but all this to say, I have a patent, or I'm a co-author on a patent for it's a methodology patent for installing strain gauges for high temperature applications. So I helped, actually wrote I wrote all the justifications for it and all that jazz. I think it was accepted in 2017, if I'm remembering correctly, something along those lines. But no, plenty of experience, writing conference papers, putting together presentations, and also, since I have my master's, I had to write just short of 200-page thesis. So yeah, but that's not to say you have to have any of that prior to doing this stuff. I mean, It would be good. I mean, Grammarly will probably teach you loads of, tips and tricks for how to properly structure your paragraphs and all that jazz. And I've helped a couple of folks that have wanted to, kind of get into this, because I write like I speak, which for anybody that's listening to this right now is in a very rambling fashion at times. So for folks, I also acknowledge the fact that we also have short attention spans. So I do try and adjust that. So when people go through and read, they're reading just chunks of hard hitting analysis, but then I'll break it up with a table, a graphic, or, a Twitter video or something like that, kind of exemplifying the thing that I'm talking about. But I think it's just, the big thing is just to go out and get those reps. try and get those reps. And then if you do have that network and can create that network of folks that will give you feedback on how you can adjust your writing, I don't know, not skill set, but either way, like how you produce an article, then you'll just get better with time. And I think that's really all that's needed.
And getting reps it is like really awesome to be able to continue to do it and see where you improve and go back and look at stuff that I don't know if it's fun to go back and look at stuff that you did, but it is nice to see that you've grown, So same with podcasting. So prior to doing the whole podcasting thing on your, where that's, I have my own podcast. Had you guested on other podcasts prior to that? No.
Nope. My very first show was actually like my very first time doing an actual podcast. And no joke, my very first time doing any sort of like audio or video content, fantasy football related, was a Scott Fishbowl, I guess, interview type of thing with Todd Burrows. Forget what
I did that
Todd
too.
from PA.
Yeah,
but now
Run to Daylight.
Yeah, Run to Daylight.
Yeah, I did that as well. Hey, that was my first too.
That was what, 4 or 5 years ago.
That was a while ago. Yeah, you called in and talked on
And I remember I was freaking out. I mean, it was just audio, right? And I remember I think it was also like a similar about this. No, not this time of year. Well, yeah, it was about this time of year because I mean the draft is in just a couple of months. But it was almost the same setup. Kids had the soccer game, and I'm just like the whole time I'm sitting there like this, just looking at my phone every few minutes, like, okay, I gotta leave soon because I got this show. And it's like now it's much easier for me to come on and especially talk with like friends like yourself. But back then it was just like every show was like the biggest show. And I had to like spend so much time like preparing and all this other stuff, which I still do in order to make sure that when I do speak, I'm actually speaking like intelligently and I'm providing like good analysis and statistics, so on and so forth. But even then, like, it was just so hard for me to come up with, I guess, content or ways to discuss or even just relate what I was trying to say or come up with, I guess, useful answers without sounding like it was all rehearsed. It was just, again, because I was always have like my notes up and trying to read through those and like, just stick to the cards, Christopher, just stick to the notes and you can get through this. Literally sweating almost the whole time, like doing all of that. But now it's become a little bit easier just because, I mean, again, it's almost like writing. Like the more reps you get in, the more comfortable you get with doing whatever it is. And then afterwards, the thoughts become a little bit easier to come up with on the fly.
So for someone who is starting out in podcasting, I know you've given a lot of really helpful tips. Is there something that you wish you would have known prior to your first start in podcasting that would have been really helpful to know from the start?
I would say the big thing is that when you're putting together your, let's say, your show sheet, if that's the way that you want to do it, like me, like I mentioned, engineer, both my parents are military. So like I'm super structured person. So like I need notes, I need bullets, man. Like I need to be able to know what the show is going to consist of before I even sit down to record. Like if I was asked to like freestyle on a podcast, I would be sweating fucking bullets, like from like the time I hit record to the end, and you would hear me stuttering just like the entire time.
Yeah.
But when I first started creating show sheets, because we would be having guests on and all that, I think one of the things that I would do was just I wanted to turn the show over to the guest, being respectful of their time, and also the fact that these people aren't coming here to listen to me. They're coming here to listen to, I don't know, Mark Schofield, because we had him on like a couple of years back, or Scott Fish, or they're coming to listen to Matt Harmon. They're not coming to listen to you. Well, they kind of are, though. Now that I'm thinking about it, and this was not the way that I was thinking back when I first started, they are coming to, because this is your show. I mean, of course, it's your show with the guest that folks want to hear. But when you ask questions, folks also, you should be able to provide, I guess, your 2 cents on it. Not necessarily give a dissertation on whatever the topic might be, but folks should also be able to hear your thoughts on the subject too. Your ability to provide some sort of analysis on it so that they leave the conversation thinking, oh yeah, well, it's great to hear JJ Zacharyson or Rich Rebar break down rookie prospects. But it also sounds like, man, that Casey Kasem girl. I mean, that sounds like she knows what she's talking about too. I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna have to listen to her podcast. Like, she knows her shit. So, but my gut instinct was, I'm just going to read the question, and I'm going to read the question verbatim, like I have on my show sheet, so it sounds like it's rehearsed, and then I'm just going to back out and let the guests take over and like have them give their 3 to 5 minute answer, and then I'll ask the next question verbatim, and then give them another 3 to 5 minutes, and then all right, where can folks find you at? Thank you so much for your time. All the outro bullshit that we do. Whereas now I try and create a conversation around it, whereas there you can structure a deeper, and I guess more of, instead of a Q&A, it's more of a back and forth where the guest can then give their thoughts like on what your analysis is, while also answering the question. So like you're kind of setting them up in order to give their thoughts, but now you can kind of go down different rabbit holes. Like you can get different angles of what their analysis is going to be or what their answer is going to be, versus just asking them, what do you think about Sky Moore? Instead of, I guess the perfect example would be, like something like that. Like, what do you think about Sky Moore? Versus, well, I think that because Patrick Mahomes, his ADOT has been decreasing over the past 3 to 4 years. They also went after a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster. Sky Moore fits perfectly into what the Kansas City Chiefs are trying to do right now. What do you think about Sky Moore? Boom. It's just like, it's a slight twist, but now the guest now has a way to think of, or they can say, yes, I agree, for this reason, that reason, and that reason. Or they can say, well, I don't agree because, well, they also signed NVS. They still got Mecole Hardman. So Sky Moore kind of fits in there, but it's not to say that he's going to be, the wide receiver 1 or anything like that. So maybe be careful of what his ADP is going to look like. So like, you see what I'm saying? Like that's where you can build a conversation around it.
And when I guest on podcast, I get anxiety when I get just asked the question and then I have to respond, because I'm like, okay, give me something to build on, like,
put on the spot, like, right?
Put on the spot, and then you're like, okay, well, and then if I say this and I sound dumb because so I'm like, and I always think about that too. And also when you're listening to a podcast, it's just a greater experience for the listeners to be able to hear it sound just like a conversation and not like something that's back and forth rehearsed. So
exactly. And I think that's where folks come back to, like, some of my favorite podcasts, either like not even football related. Like one of my favorite podcasts, like outside of football, is the Brilliant Idiots with Charlemagne the God and Andrew Schultz, who's a comedian. And they'll bring on guests, like whether it be like rappers, like ball players, boxers, or whatever. And a lot of them, they are just conversations. Like they're asking them questions, but all the questions are structured around a conversation. So like there are different talking points and rabbit holes that they can kind of bounce into, like issues and topics that they can discuss, like as they go through. I mean, they're hitting all of their questions, but you don't really feel like it's an interview. You feel like it's a conversation because Charlemagne will bring up one thing, and then the guest will say this, then Andrew Schultz will kind of pop in with his thing, and then maybe they'll pop down that rabbit hole, come back, talk about something different. So I think that's really the type of, the type of vibe that I want to get from a podcast, like versus, welcome to the Dynasty Show podcast with Chris Allen. Welcome to my guest, Mark. Okay, what do you think about this player? Silence.
For real. I get that. No, totally. So, I want to talk to you about Dynasty Owner's Manual, because that was something that I got to guest on, and it was just a really cool experience. And it was so different than so many other things. It's so different than, it was the first of its, one of the first of its kind. So what made you and Adam decide that was something you guys wanted to work on?
I think that was really like a conversation that we had together, where we were like, well, hey, I mean, what's missing? Like how could we be unique enough without knowing shit about podcasting that folks will actually want to listen to us? Like we happen to know a number of folks, like good folks, like in the industry already. Like we're not talking about the Matt Harmons and the JJ Zacharyns of the world, but like we know the Casey Kasems of the world. Like we know the J Mikes of the world. We know like the Peter Howards of the world, like all the folks that people are listening to on a daily basis, like, for whether it be data, whether it be strategy, whether it be player takes, or whatever the case may be. and we know all these people and we're comfortable talking with them. So why not bring them on and get their takes on these different topics and kind of build this manual, like an owner's manual, even though now I guess technically like saying owners has been canceled, but like you get the idea. Like that was the vibe we wanted to create with the show, was that you're getting this person's take on this topic, whether it be trading, whether it be building your roster, whether it be churning the back end of your roster. I mean, insert topic here. We wanted to find that person that was kind of known for that thing, and that would essentially be a chapter like in the manual. And like, while, it never really got to the point where we wanted it to, I do think that was a unique enough idea that, that, kept us going for about 2-3 years or something like that. And Adam and I, we've become like really close friends. And, I'm just happy that we've been able to continue creating content together, like now over at Football Guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's super awesome to be able to have that bond, and all those people that you just listed. Like, I'm like, those are like, that's my group of people that
That's
like
us.
you were talking about the 8, like, so yeah. That's exactly
the open bar crew. Like,
that's the open bar crew. Well, that's what I was going to say when you were talking about show sheets, because I was going to be like, yeah, except for
that show, I swear. And I know that, like, I think I'll see J Mike on Saturday. At least I think I will. And he'll probably he'll probably give me a bear hug and then like slap the shit out of me afterwards. But like getting invited onto the open bar, especially at that time in my like quote unquote like career in fantasy football, it would used to give me like it give me the sweats, like for real, because the conversation could just go anywhere.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, I'm a structured person. I need to know what we're talking about. And the Gabe's not sending you a show sheet.
That's
J Mike's not sending you a show sheet. You're just got to figure it out. We're just gonna be chilling, and we can bounce from ranking Little Debbie food to who's the 101.
Yeah,
and that's the 3-hour conversation that you're gonna have that night.
It was awesome. I was on that show before I was even putting out any content whatsoever. I was just on Twitter talking to everybody else, and they were like, come on. But I remember like even them having one time when they had ladies night, they had Brandon, Marianne, Leon, and they were like, hey, did you create that? We needed you to come up with the show sheet. Do you have it available? Is it ready? Blah, 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 blah. And she was like, what? And they're like, we're literally going on in like 10 minutes. Do you have the show sheet prepared? So she was like, I was like, they're pulling. No, don't. They're just pulling over on you. So don't let them do it. So, it was great. And it's, it's great to have that kind of community that we're all, and I get you on that whole, like, the feeling of going on that show and how it goes out of control. Like, it was out of control. Every time. So, having a structured podcast, having a co-host, when you have a co-host, what should, like, a person who's starting out, if they're trying to find somebody to co-host with them, what should they be looking for in like an ideal person to work with that way?
At least what I've found, and this was one of the reasons why, I don't know, it wasn't even really a question of if we could do it. It was just when we would do it, was just somebody that you vibe with. I mean, you don't have to agree on everything. Hell, I can probably show you some text messages between me and Adam where we don't agree on anything. But it's just, can you vibe with that person? Like when, and if you, and can you like be a team with them? It's essentially, I mean, I'm not going to compare it to a marriage or anything like that, but it's like, can you work together? And whether it's simple stuff like, do you know when to transition from when a guest is done talking, like, to the next question, like simple stuff, or to more complicated stuff, like once the money does start rolling in, like if it does, like if you're actually able to monetize like your podcast or your show, your whatever, how are you going to split that? Where's the revenue going to go? So like things can go from the simplistic, like simple side of things where you're just figuring stuff out, like what works and what doesn't, to having to make like complicated or just actual business decisions that could further either of your two's career. And if you can, like, you're never going to know that up front, but I think for the most part, you can at least generally figure out like how that person, like who they are. Like, do you believe that they're a good person? Like, do you think that, given the chance, like they're going to do like the right thing? And are they willing to put in the work? Like, are you going to be able to divvy up the responsibilities of, editing the podcast if you're into that sort of thing? Like, I know Russ, like Dynasty Outhouse, he doesn't edit shit.
I don't either.
I was like, I would be spending like 4 to 5 hours editing like the DOM pods, like back
I
in the
would
day.
be divorced.
Yeah, Saturday mornings, man, like I'd get up, get the kids, make sure the kids were situated, and after that I'd come right here into the office and I'd spend the next like 3 to 4 hours like editing a podcast. Never again. But it's stuff like that. Like, once you get into it and you're figuring out, okay, well, what's the daily grind actually going to look like? What actually has to happen in order for us to periodically put out content? And if you're at least sure, if you're certain that person is going to be the one that's going to be like by your side, like, taking care of things that need to get taken care of, then yeah. And then if not, I don't know, you might have to figure something else out.
Great advice. Like, I decided to do this solo because I decided that if it got monetized, I just wanted all the money to myself. That's the only reason I decided to do that. No, not really, but yeah, no, because if that was the case, 50, however many episodes in, this would be monetized. It's not, hey guys, hey sponsors, this is the plug. Okay,
right.
Anyway. So podcast. So getting guests to come on your podcast is, I know we talked about networking. Did you go about that the same way, just reaching out?
Yes, and that's the worst part. I know that I struggle with that so much because, like I said earlier, if I already have an issue with going up to these stars, frankly, in my mind, like, these people are stars. Like, I've more or less grown up in the industry, like, quote unquote, listening to the Sigmund Blooms, the Rich Rebars, the JJ Zachary's, and so on and so forth. Matt Harmon's, like, insert name here, insert name with blue check mark here. I would just have so much of an issue asking them to actually take time out of their day to come and talk with me. I struggle with that, and I'm not going to be at 38, 39 years old. I still have anxiety about asking people for help.
Yeah.
And I'm just being real. And I think but I know that at the end of the day, that's the way that you can actually get time with people. So of course the bulk of your interaction is going to be for the content, but you will have that time, maybe even if it's just a few minutes, to thank them for their time, like off air, being able to catch up with them and like, hey, I've got this going on, or, or whatever. Because like I had, I think this, like another quick story, I had the same issue when asking Evan Silva to come on the show that I co-host for 4 for 4. And because we were looking for guests and they were like, hey, could you possibly ask? Like, I think I could ask him. I don't have much of an issue. Like, I can just ask. Like, what's he gonna say? No, block me, and like I'll just never hear from Evan again. But no, I hit him up. He said he'd love to come on because he's done other like 4 for 4 content before. Like, he hangs out fairly regularly with Connor Allen and Ryan Noonan, who work for 4 for 4 since they all live out in Chicago. But it evolved past me doing the show to, I actually went out and stayed at Silva's place, like in Chicago, like last year, because we were talking, and I had actually seen another colleague, John Daigle, who now also works for 4 for 4. He was with me over at Roto World at the time, but Daigle came and stayed at my place, and he was like, yeah, you need to come out to Chicago. Silva was like, hell yeah, you need to come out to Chicago. And it's just like little things like that, where without asking, you're never going to be given that opportunity to be able to talk with people and find out who they are past the mic, who they are outside of their articles. And until, like, if your goal is to just, I don't know, like, I think clout chasing is probably a bit too extreme of a word. And I'm not really trying to like say like folks are just clout chasing by getting follows like from folks with blue check marks. But if your goal is to really to network, then do that. I mean, folks should know like parts and pieces of who you are, like past whatever this, bullshit that we do, every few hours a day or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So being able to, have the courage to ask, and then also making sure that, you kind of leave them with this feeling that you're not just asking them to do that. And then it's like, as soon as the show is done, you turn off your camera and then you bounce. It's like, hey, thanks for your time. Got to go by. Like, no, like value their time and value them as people. And then of course, you're more apt to be able to continue expanding that network.
For sure. And going back to writing, because writing is one of those things that I feel like is like really important to the fantasy football space, because a lot of people don't have time to listen to things when they're at work or whatever, but they can skim an article and see who, they should start, or what player, or what, this, that, or the other. And putting out content and knowing that you have this one group of people that's like super brainy, all like fantasy football. This is, and then you have these people that just play fantasy football for fun. And that's, how do you make sure that you write an article that can reach everybody and that they can understand?
Oh yeah. And I try and use as many, I guess, like casual terms as possible. Like I'm definitely not trying to sound scientific in my whenever I write. And even if I do wind up using a tool, like let's say, for instance, there was actually a series of articles that I've just put out on 444 that looks at win rate or playoff advance rate. That's using some metrics that Sam Hoppin for 444 has put together. But in order to actually show where the highest, I guess, where the most players are getting picked based off of round, I'd like to use a chart that's called a probability density function, which essentially just like maps out, okay, the probability of this player getting selected in this round is so high. And I like using that because for me, I'm a visual person. So I see like, oh, big bar, that means, more of a higher chance of this actually happening. Most folks don't know what that means or what it is. So when I actually use that chart, I say, well, if you don't understand, I literally say this in my articles. If you don't know what a probability density function is, just look at where the big bar is at, and and that's it. Like, okay, big bar, that's over in like, round 8 through 10. That's where, everything is happening. So focus on that area. So it's just when you break it down in simple terms, you can use the most, I don't know, complex or exquisite or like unique tool as possible, but you always need to find a way to relate it back to somebody that has like absolutely no idea what the hell it is that you're talking about. And if you can't do that, that tool ain't worth shit. So I mean, that visual or that table or whatever, or that advanced metric, if you can't relate it to somebody that would have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, you've wasted your time and theirs. So that's why I try and make sure that regardless of what type of background I might have and what technical skill set that I might use in order to create my articles, and I could show this stuff to my daughter who has like zero interest in like fantasy football. I mean, she's about to graduate high school, like no interest in football. But like I could show it to my daughter and she would at least have a decent understanding of what it is that I'm trying to convey, like whenever I write something.
And with writing and how some sites are doing away with writing, some sites are like wanting more writers. It's like all over the place with writing. Like I don't think it's ever going to get old. But for people who are trying to put out like content for the first time, but they're not really sure, like I can't think of an idea, or I can't, what do you think is something that could maybe get that light bulb to turn on for them?
Some folks, I use an ideation sheet. I think like JJ Zacharyson, like he had mentioned this maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, where at the beginning or end of the season, he'll just write out like a bunch of questions. And they could be questions about a player. There could be questions about a statistic. There could be questions about just some general trend that he might have seen at some point throughout the season. And start with that. Like, let's say, for instance, if you had a question about, I'm just thinking about something off the top of my head. I'll relate it to something that I would write about. Like, do players tend to have poor performing games towards the end of the season because it's cold? That might be something that like, oh, I don't know. Well, how? And then if that's your starting question, well, then you might be, then from there, you can just kind of, I don't know, like have a sub question and go, well, how would you solve that? Well, you might need data for maybe the months of like November and December, maybe fantasy football performances from quarterbacks or, whatever, like about the same time frame. I don't know, you can maybe even look up scientific like journals like outside of fantasy football that might corroborate with, oh yeah, because it's cold outside, your joints hurt more and you don't want to play, like, whatever. So it's just like you can start to answer like bits and pieces of that question just from other, I don't know, like side studies you can possibly do and data that you can possibly like pick out. And so as long as you start to find like ways to answer like parts of the question, then that's how you can build out an entire article. And that way you can say, oh yeah, this actually is a thing, or you can possibly prove that it's not a thing. But I think starting from that main like building block like type of question, and then kind of like breaking it down from there, I think that's typically how at least I've tried to go about doing it. And some folks, I think another way some folks have done it is they'll just be, and this is more for like the analytical folks, but they'll just be playing around with data, and they'll just they'll just throw up a chart. Like Twitter, I think I've seen it less on Twitter nowadays, just because I think the backlash on Twitter has become like more of a thing where folks would be like, that's stupid. And like people, like we share ideas less on social media now than we used to, like 2, 3, 4 years ago. But a lot of folks, that used to be the place where we would just share ideas. Like there's no article or anything. It's just, this is something that I found. You could probably turn it into 800 to 1,000 word article if you wanted to. But here's just like, I don't know, these are just my thoughts. And I'm just like, I don't know, brain vomiting onto the timeline. And I think it was a good way for a lot of folks, and myself included, like back around like the 2018, 2019 like time frame, just to get thoughts out. And if you're comfortable with doing that, go right ahead. And maybe folks might chime in and say, hey, if you looked at this, maybe if you thought about that, and kind of help you, kind of spur you along as to how you can try and figure out if what you're looking at is legit or not.
When you started playing fantasy football, I'm going to take it back a little ways, back to when you first started. So I'm guessing that you first started with redraft. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so when did you become a fan of Dynasty, and how'd you get into that?
So I only became a fan of Dynasty within the last, that was maybe like 2017, 2018. And to be quite honest, when Adam and I first started the Dynasty Owner's Manual, I think I was maybe a year into Dynasty. I was no expert. I'm not an expert now, to be quite honest. There's so much about Dynasty that I still don't understand, nor have I properly implemented or executed with the teams that I currently have. But I would say one of the things that you'll find, especially once you start getting into like the industry at large, I see Dynasty leagues with each group that you wind up working with, they're almost like the fruit cakes that people pass out like around the winter time frame. Like everybody gets them, and you wind up joining them, and then after a few years, you're like, why did I do this?
Yeah.
Why did I get this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun to be around those people. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, even if it's not your thing, you always wind up getting invited to the staff Dynasty League, because every staff has one. Like regardless of which, like whatever industry place that you work at, there's always going to be a group of 12 people that wants to get a Dynasty League together. And I think after a while, it just becomes like more commonplace for you. Because I think at one point I had like over 15 Dynasty leagues. I am not Dynasty Outhouse. I do not need that many leagues. I am not John Bosch. I do not need that many leagues. So I think after a while, it just becomes more, I don't know, easier to understand, because like we were talking about with so many other things, it's just the reps, like in-season managing, off-season trades, churning your roster, all that other stuff. Like if it becomes something that you're really interested in and trying to figure out, which in my case I was, then that's what I think. Time is one of those things that's really going to help you out, because you're never going to learn everything in one season. And shoot, I bet you Scott Fisher, even Ryan McDowell would admit that it's probably taken them quite a number of years in order to get to where they're at today. And there are probably still some wrinkles that they're still figuring out. But it's just being willing to put in the time, I think, is the biggest thing.
And you are a fan of a lot of different formats. Is there a format that you're not into, or are you into just about everything?
IDP, and that's no hate. Like I'm not throwing shade at the IDP folks at all. It's just been my interest has always lied like on the offensive side of the ball. And I know, or at least I have an understanding of the stats that matter and the data that I would look at in order to evaluate a player, like whether it's quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, even from a film watching standpoint, because I've been around enough film watchers to know like these are the things that they look for. Like with quarterbacks, even if it's not fantasy related, like pump fakes and being able to manage the pocket for quarterbacks, running backs, how you approach your running lanes. Slow to fast through. That's my buddy Damian Parsons out on Twitter. I think he used that term before. And wide receivers, of course. So for as many times as I've read Matt Harmon's work, if you don't know anything about route running or separation or anything like that, like I can't help you. And even tight ends to a certain degree, since we know they play that hybrid role. But yeah, I think my interest has always been on the offensive side, trying to also have my brain expand my brain to the defensive side of the ball. I just don't think I have that bandwidth. So I've just kind of left that to you folks that do the IDP stuff. Y'all are wizards. And I will come to you when I need advice on IDP type stuff. But for right now, just give me redraft Dino or best ball. Like that's it for me.
Are you a fan of college football?
No, surprisingly enough. Maybe that was, and I think to be quite honest, because I went to UC, and I constantly tell people this: I'm a Bearcat, not a Buckeye, because if you tell folks that you went to college in Ohio, the automatic assumption is that you either went to Ohio State or you're an Ohio State fan, and for me that always just kind of like I don't know, rubbed me the wrong way, because like we played them. I think it was like my first or second year when I was in college. And actually, it was probably, I think it was my second or third, actually, take that back, because my sister was also there. She's a couple years behind me, and she was dating the quarterback at the time, George Murphy, I believe, was his name. And we almost won. We almost beat Ohio State that year. I think we just lost by like a touchdown or something like that. They came down and played us like in Nippert Stadium. And I think ever since then, I've always been like, I hate Ohio State. These guys suck. Even though now it's just like now I've like since college and all that other stuff, I'm always happy to see Ohio State becoming a prominent school like within within the fantasy football ranks, minus our quarterbacks. Although I'm praying for Justin Fields, but everybody else it's just like it's kind of been just like more of my Ohio brethren, and all that other stuff. But yeah, it's just I don't know, college football. I think since I spend so much time preparing for Sundays. Saturday is just like not. I try and stay away from the sport as much as possible on the weekends. And since like sports betting isn't allowed in Ohio, at least not yet, I haven't been involved in it as much.
Okay, so when you do Dynasty, do you learn about these players without? I mean, going back and looking at what they've done and everything, but not watching the actual games. How do you evaluate the players in that sense? For people like me, I'm the same way. I don't follow college football, so I'm way back here, so I'm trying to learn. How do I learn about these guys?
I do all of my homework like during the off season. So once like December, January like come around, even though by that point the Devi folks, they're already a year ahead of us anyway. Most of like the Dino folks, like the like the Ray Garvins of the world, like they've had their ranks out for quite some time like already. But I try and do my homework like in the January, February timeframe, like where we've got 2-3 months before the draft, but you can get in like at least statistically speaking. I mean, all that stuff is kind of out there in terms of Chris Olave was good here, but he wasn't great there, or where the quarterbacks are at. Like, and then for any of the guys that really are, or like we do expect to have like good draft capital, I can pull up. Highlights aren't the best, because they only give you the good parts to their game.
Yeah.
But you can find full games for a number of players. I think I was doing a player profile on Marquise Brown like before he came out, and I just pulled up YouTube, and there were like full games of like Oklahoma when he was still like catching passes from Kyler, although he's gonna be doing that now anyway. But it's just like there was stuff like that available where you can watch just like full games, and you can see like route, like every single route, and and all that. So you're getting the full context of the player, and not just the little cut-ups that folks do like on Twitter, which can be sometimes useful. But again, if you want to see, you don't want to get the full gamut of if this player can do the thing that you want them to do, or that everybody's saying that they can do. That's where actually taking the time in order to maybe watch a few games, since you can actually speed all that stuff up on YouTube and save you a few minutes. But I think that's the best way to go about doing it.
With people in the fantasy football space, you had brought up a lot of names earlier. Like, you've brought up a lot of like really interesting, really cool, really, brilliant minds. And I don't want to stroke egos too hard here, but we're gonna, the Fantasy Football Expo is a thing that I like to talk about on here to get it out to more people who don't know about it. But I know that you've gone. How many times have you actually attended the event?
Every year.
Every year.
Mhm.
Okay. And so every year you get to meet new people, and every year you get to have new stories with people and everything like that.
Mhm.
How awesome is that to be able to meet a group of people that are like-minded about like something like fantasy football?
It is more or less. I wouldn't say it's not on the same level as Comic Con, because now Comic Con has become a part of just like, I don't know, our pop culture,
Yeah.
regardless of like what you do or what you don't do. But I would say that being able to do something like that has been kind of like a dream come true, because we talk about the fantasy football community like as it is, like us being able to, go and talk with our friends and meet new people, share ideas and all that. But it's all online. And
Mm-hmm.
while that only gives you a part of it, like I can message you, whenever, it's like, hey, what's up, homie? What you got going on? Hope everything's good. All
Yeah.
that other stuff. But being able to actually see somebody, being able to actually like talk with them in person and have a
Yeah.
drink or do a draft or be a part of, just being a part of, like, physically being a part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an experience that I know like some folks, they'll just never get to do. I
Yeah.
mean, most of their, or almost all of their connections are just going to be in this little Twitter sphere of ours. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always been more of a like, hey, let's get out and let's do something.
Yeah.
Let's actually see people and let's do that. So I think Bob Lung, and what he's been able to put together over the past like 4 years, it's just been just an amazing thing. Like going from, like, I remember the very first year
Mm-hmm.
that we did. It's not like it was like that long ago, but like the first year where it was just like, I don't know, like 50 of us, like somewhere in that range, and seeing it grow to where it's at right now, like where we're like, I think last year I was just dumbstruck by the site when we were out at the pavilion that Saturday night, got the big screen with preseason games on, and everybody was there, talking, having drinks or whatever, laughing, and just like, that's what I've been wanting to see, like my entire time being a part of this community, being able to do that. I mean, it doesn't matter who you might. I mean, I saw like Mike Clay, like guys like Mike Clay, Bob Harris, and all those folks there. Being able to see folks like you, Casey.
Yeah.
I mean, and J Mike, and like all of our,
Yeah.
our people, like our
Yeah.
people. Like that's what I want, and like, and
Yeah.
that's really what the expo brings about. So if you've got your click, on Twitter, or in DMs or in Discord or whatever, that's fine. But you will never be able to experience like the same thing unless y'all will be able to get together in person, and the expo allows you to do that.
Yeah. It's like I don't remember. I can't remember anything, but I was talking to somebody. It's like, summer camp for fantasy football.
It really is.
So
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Of course we get a little wild,
yeah, a little
and
crazy. It's okay.
throw some alcohol into the mix at any sort of event with a bunch of, 20 and 30 something year olds. I'm sure something crazy is bound to happen. But yeah, we definitely have our fun, but I think that's what it's all about. It really is.
And the expo is really cool because it has a lot of panels and it does a lot of,
Mhm.
cool experiences like that. And there's going to be a lot of really cool panels this year, and you're going to be a part of one, putting together and everything. What exactly is your panel going to be about? And, can you give a little inside,
Yeah.
peek? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm putting together a mixer event with the minority content creators. Like so much of this space, and not to say that it's bad, good, or whatever, but it's just that there are not a lot of folks that look like me. You've got like we mentioned, we've got your J Mice, we've got our Troy Kings, we've got our Ray G's. I mean, but there's not a lot of folks that look like us. And so being able to, I want to put together this mixer because I want to see all of us. Like I want to
Mhm.
be able to know who these folks are in this space, because to be,
Right.
be quite honest, again, like I said, I'm a hermit on social media. I've got my little DM threads with folks like you and everybody else, but I want to know who else is out there that's trying to make their way into becoming the next great content creator, or working at Yahoo or ESPN, or like our boy Laquan, who just got his spot over at NFL Network. I mean, I want to see those folks, and I want to be able to
Mhm.
support them in any way that I can. So, yeah, I'm putting together a mixer. It's going to be on the Saturday before the expo. Just a couple of hours where we kind of get together, break bread, introduce each other. I'll have folks like I said, like Ray Garvin is going to be in town. who else is going to be there? Like Marcus Grant, I already talked with him. He's also going to be there. Troy, a number of other folks. And then whomever else, like we can get kind of like, word of mouth to kind of show up and introduce themselves. Cause that's really what it's about. I want to be able to expand our network so that when we do see other folks, other people of color putting out their work, we're able to support them because we want to make sure that their voice is heard, whether it's, if they're talking about fantasy football, cool, but if they're also into fantasy basketball, whatever the case may be, or if they're doing film analysis, like Damian Parsons, because Damian doesn't even do fantasy football, but he's transitioned from putting out video clips of prospects on Twitter to now he has a full-time job with the Draft Network inside of about 18 months. I mean, it's cool to be able to see folks like on that type of journey. And my hope is that we'll do this mixer this year. Next year, we'll probably have just a formal panel like during the expo itself. So like more folks can kind of do like a Q&A type of session and we can talk about the issues, all that. But I mean that's the goal. That's the goal. I want to see more faces like in this place. So yeah, that's the idea.
That is like super awesome. Yeah, like I've had Ray on, and I've had Troy on, and we've talked about that. But being a woman in this space is one thing. Being a minority in this space is another thing. And you don't see as much, diversity as one would like. And so, when people are wanting to get involved in something like fantasy football content creating, and they're not sure because they don't see somebody that looks like they do. They don't have that person to look at and be like, hey, what kind of advice do you have for someone who is kind of reserved about doing that then because they don't have that?
Oh, yeah, because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like building up that network, putting yourself out there. And I mean, just kind of, I don't know, for me, it was working through like my own anxiety of being able to ask people for help. But as we're trying to build this community so that we do know like faces and like connecting, gain some of those connections, that's where you can start to be able to get your work out in front of more people. And so the more you're willing to do that and the more you're willing to support others as they support you, that's how, I mean, you become a part of the community. And that's how you can actually, expand your, like I was saying earlier, let's expand your network and make sure that, your work is getting in front of more people. And also, like I had said earlier, like once you do kind of, if you do happen to, let's say, get a follow from JJ Zacharyson or Rich Rebar, Matt Harmon, like, or whomever, talk with them one-on-one, send them a DM or tag them on Twitter and say, hey, if you're a film watcher, tag Matt Waldman, say, or even if you're a person of color, like what's his name, FB Game Plan, if I'm remembering like his Twitter handle like correctly. Hey, I was, watching this prospect and I saw da 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 da. Like, what did you think or what did you see? Engage with them so they know that your face and what you're about. And so again, past just asking them to guest on a show or past asking them to edit your article or whatever, engage with them so that they have that understanding of, oh, okay, this person, they've got that drive. They're we're like-minded on how we put the or how we analyze or how we approach the game. And so from there you can build a relationship with them. So again, you can have your content like out to some of those folks. And when an opportunity comes along, you might be the person that they tap in order to take it on.
And I mean, the heart of it all and the soul of it all is that this community is such a good group of people for the most part, a group of people that friendly and opening and welcome. And it's just awesome to have that kind of group, especially something that's based off of people that are online. How did you find out about fantasy Twitter in the first place?
I randomly joined Twitter. It was mostly for the news aspect of Twitter, just because I knew there were so many analysts that were on Twitter and that if you wanted just quick updates, then this is where you would go in order to do it. I never really thought of it as a place where you can essentially have like your own like online resume, more or less. Like, here, I wrote this article, I was on this podcast or whatever. But I think that's the only reason I joined. I never really thought it would turn into, and I say this almost all the time, at least when I talk about the fantasy industry. Like, I never saw it like getting to this point, like where I would know or at least be connected with so many other folks, because I just never thought about it like that. Fantasy football being having the community aspect to it. But I mean, I wouldn't change this for the world at this point, because it's just so cool being able to, talk with you, or text message John Bosch, or like I said, this weekend I'm driving up to Columbus to see Bob Lung and J Mike and a few other folks, like for Dynasty League that we're all in, to do our rookie draft. I mean, this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Being able to actually connect with all these people and have a meal with them and catch up and all that other stuff.
I need to do that with some Dallas people. We really need to get a Dynasty League together, Dallas people. So if you're listening to this, hit me up. But another thing that is really awesome, and you've brought up Scott Fish a lot. No big deal. But another thing that is really cool when it comes to getting to know people and getting to meet people in the space is Scott Fish Bowl. So how long have you been a part of that, and let people know kind of what it's about, since some people listening might not have any clue?
Yeah. So, I mean, the Scott Fish Bowl, I mean, my goodness, I think the first year that I got invited, it really was like that point in like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory where Charlie like finds the golden ticket, because it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like he actually like me. You almost feel like you have that personal connection, even though Scott sends out like 100 emails at a time. But it almost feels like Scott wrote this email specifically for me and nobody else. But it becomes such an exclusive thing, even though thousands of us wind up getting invited to it. But it's not just that. I mean, the exclusivity portion of it, or just being a part of the tournament, it's whatever. But it's all the stuff, at least for me, it's been all the stuff that comes outside of that, like the FC eliminators that Bosch puts together. Mm-hmm. I mean, those drafts that are donating to charity, or all the other additional money that comes in to donate to Fantasy Cares. It's just, again, that's another part to the fantasy football community that I never even thought existed. I thought folks just like came on here, I'm just going to play fantasy football. I might win a bunch of money, and then after that, I'm going home. But to see the amount of, I guess, goodwill that gets brought back into the different communities through Toys for Tots, I mean, Fantasy Cares, like so on and so forth. I think that was just completely amazed me and kind of changed my approach to managing my own leagues. I provide charity donations when I can, like based off of the leagues that I help commission. And I've asked other leagues to kind of do the same, just noticing that that's a thing that, I don't know. I mean, like we do this for, $40-50 a pop or whatever. And I mean, of course, I know folks would want to go back home with all of that cash, but if you can, take off a little bit and, kick it over to a charity donation or something like that, it's just that aspect of it, I think, kind of goes not necessarily under the radar, but it's one of like the, I don't know, lesser discussed aspects of it. It's always a good thing to do. And, but yeah, I think ever since, I think it was SFB 9, I think was like my very first one that I got invited to, if I'm remembering correctly. But ever since then, it's just been like, all right, I'm in. What else is going on? Like, what else can I hop into? Like, what's Bosch got going on, so that I can, throw $10 at this or throw $10 at that. Yeah. And then, like really, I mean, that's where you really do become a larger part of the community, because you can see like how quickly folks want to give. I mean, with all of the different things, with all the other side events, stuff like that going on, and plus the draft, and then of course you've got the draft itself, that actually, that actually happens afterwards. But it's just, for me, it's all the other stuff that comes with it, because you can see how good like these people are like in the community. I mean, we might have some bad eggs like here and there, but I think around this time of year, that's when you really see like the generosity and like the goodness of people, like when Scott Fish Bowl comes around.
For sure. In your free time, when you had brought up your family, what do you guys like to do? As a family, what do you guys tend to do when you have off time to do things?
We ain't doing shit. No, I'm playing. So let's see. The kids are, we're trying to like, almost like the way I got brought up, and we get the kids into sports. My wife and I, like, we're into board games. We've gone to, there's an expo actually out in Boston. It's called PAX, the Penny Arcade Expo, where they do everything from board games to video games to, and actually do like a night where they actually have the folks from Acquisitions Incorporated, the folks that actually make like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. And it's because like we're into that too, like mega nerds. Like I apologize for folks that are not into this type of shit. But so we've actually watched like a D&D session. We watched it like on TV at my friend's place that lives in Boston, in the Boston area, but like watched like live D&D sessions. We've played like tabletop games like at the expo, and so we brought it back, brought a few games back. Like each year we've gone like to our kids, and the reason I bring that up is because we wanted to have find a way to interact with them, but also teach them stuff at the same time. And we actually went to a nerd parent panel that was there like at the expo. And one of the things that one of the folks was talking about was that if you're going to be like playing your games with kids, I mean, even if it doesn't have to be something like super complex like Risk or Settlers of Catan or whatever the case may be. You could even try and teach them something as young as like 4 or 5 with something like Candyland by introducing the concept of choice and consequences that goes with them making that choice. And by teaching them that, you almost from an early age, they can help help their development in the decision-making process. So it's just like we kind of took that to heart, and we've tried to get them into board games. Now it's transitioned to the boys actually want to play video games all the time, like Minecraft and all the other stuff. But if we can keep them off of their devices, I mean, that's really been the big thing for us, is like just trying to keep them mentally mentally engaged, like with as many things as possible. Just because I mean, they are for as young as they are, I mean, watching YouTube videos and all this stuff like their friends do, I know is a thing that they want to do. But as long as they're learning from it, I'm kind of okay with it. And I'm also pretty big into like esports and all that. So them watching like Minecraft videos and all this other stuff isn't a big deal. But again, we want them to be able to be as well-rounded as possible. So we try and get them into as many things as we can.
And you brought up that your wife is a teacher. So with this whole pandemic, COVID-19 thing that is been a thing in our lives for the last few years and is it's that sound effect basically sums it up. But how was her working from, I guess, did she work from home? How did things work when that first started?
Split. I think depending on how things were looking like case wise, like around our area, sometimes she was there. Sometimes she was at home. Luckily, nobody in my family was ever diagnosed with it. Thank goodness. Very blessed, like to have to avoid that. Had to take our son a couple of times to the hospital to get tested because he was exposed. But overall, yeah, it's one of those like storms that you weather, and while you're in it, you're just kind of like, well, this is it. We're dealing with this, every day. And I mean, she is a fucking trooper. And I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's bad enough. I mean, nowadays with how, I don't know, and maybe this is just me, but like how little help like some students get like from their parents. It's almost like they send their kids there just to have like an 8-hour babysitter, like that type of thing. And how rude like some of the students can be, like, and just so on and so forth. But to have to deal with that on top of having to work from home and trying to teach them like through Zoom or whatever whatever it is. I mean, it's just I don't think I'd be able to do it. I was an adjunct at a local community college, and I did that for when everything started getting shut down, 2 years ago. That was my last semester. I made it 6 weeks. I think it was like 6 to 8 weeks before the end of the semester, where I was teaching like via camera, like on Zoom and all that. Back.
No,
I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. And for her to have to, where, like, is your camera on? Are you listening? Like, what are you doing? And always have to be upbeat. Because that's the way like teachers almost like they have to be. And for her to deal with all that, I mean, my hat's off to her. Like, because I just know I wouldn't have that type of strength. And it's just it's been a bear. But I'm glad it looks like at least we're getting to the end of it. Hopefully, we're getting to the end.
I mean, I'm like, I got it. So
we'll see. But at least between her and then also my kids, because they go to a separate school. I mean, at least it looks like there's a sense of normalcy returning to the schools and whatnot now. So it's definitely gotten better though.
So I want to move on from COVID talk.
Yeah.
No, but
Right.
no. Here's a couple. I've just got a couple of like random things off the top of my head, just as you were talking and as you've been talking. So,
Sure.
well, beforehand, because I almost skipped out on a really important part, which is that you brew beer.
Yeah.
That's important, especially for people. I mean, a lot of people are like, they know that you brew beer, and I'm waiting till the end to talk about it just so people are
Uh-huh.
hooked. But yeah, so you you brew beer. How did you get involved with that?
Gambling.
Oh
I
yeah.
know that's the oddest thing. No, no, it's like no bullshit. So it's a convoluted story, but more or less, I started playing cards with this group of folks through a mutual friend of my wife's. And while we were playing cards, and the guy that was hosting it on a weekly basis, he was a home brewer, like he was doing it on the side. And I was just like, oh, what you got going? I was like, yeah, a home brew. Uh, I like making this, I like making that. And I had just got into craft beer myself, like not making it, just like drinking it.
Mm-hmm.
From like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was just like my go-to at the time, to just basically anything. And because he was into home brewing, I was like, well, I mean, how'd you get into it? So he's like, yeah, I just bought a Mr. Beer kit like on Amazon. It's like $30. Just kind of learn it, read a couple of books here and there. And, I've been doing it for, I think at the time he was doing it for me like 5 or 6 years or something like that. And so I went out and did the same thing. And then from there, like we kind of struck a friendship. And it's almost in the same way that I looked at fantasy football, because with homebrewing with him, whenever we'd homebrew, I think we were homebrewing maybe once every 3 weeks or so. But
Mm-hmm.
it was me, him, and another one of his friends that we also played cards with. We would get all three of our families together. He had kids that were around the same age as my daughter at the time, because we didn't have our sons yet. And we would just get together. We would be out in the garage, shooting the shit, home brewing. The wives would be either outside or inside, kind of talking and doing their thing. Kids would be running around the backyard, and we'd be doing that, and until 5, 6 o'clock at night. Everybody would have dinner together, then we go home. I mean, it's that the community aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's just a small community, just like 3 families. But it was just like that aspect of being able to get out, being able to socialize with people, just have a good time and all that. That's what really kind of drew me to it. And then afterwards, it was, well, what else can I do with this thing? What else can I make? Just because I have that curious nature. And from there, Joey, the guy's name that got me into it, he now actually owns a brew supply store, like here in Dayton. For anybody that's interested and wants to get into it, I mean, definitely hit me up, or you can find him at HBYOB, Homebrew Your Own Beer. So hbyob.com. He has this supply store. It's been there for like 4 or 5 years now. We do competitions. We do a podcast every couple of weeks, just talking about techniques, ingredients, building recipes. I mean, all that stuff. But again, just once you kind of like find a hobby or whatever, just, I don't know, for me, it's always been kind of like, testing the limits of that hobby. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can I do with this thing? And how far can I really take it? And again, I probably never thought that I'd see or do a competition or anything like that, even though it's a great way to drink a bunch of beer for free if you wind up entering said competition. So I really advise it for folks that are into it. I think, but overall, it's just another thing that, brings me some joy and doesn't really require, well, I mean, while I'm brewing, it requires like pretty much the entire day. But like, well, I'll take that back, like 5 or 6 hours or so. But still, it's just again, something that I can create and share with other people. And that was kind of like my aim in order to do it. It's like I can make something, and then like just last year at the expo, I think I brought up like 20 growlers or something like that. And I was just like handing them out to people, like, here, try this thing. And like, I just love that aspect of it, to be quite honest.
That's super dope. So for someone like me who doesn't like beer, am I like just a person there's no hope for me, or is there something that you would suggest for someone to try if they're not a huge beer fan?
If you're not a huge beer fan, I mean, if you like fruity stuff, I mean, if you like to, because my wife is the same way. She's not a beer fan. She would basically be able to drink alcohol without being able to taste the alcohol. That's her thing,
Fair.
because
Yeah.
that's why she drinks like seltzers and all this other stuff. I try, like, my personal favorite are like New England IPAs, hazy IPAs, because they do have just like they're like fruit bombs. Like,
Hmm.
while there can be a decent amount of hops that are used in them. Like they're all late addition hops. So you're really just getting the aroma, you're getting the flavor without the same amount of bitterness. So I've always tried to, I don't know, not necessarily sweeten like by adding stuff to it, but just kind of leaning more towards that side. So it's like, it is beer. I mean, it is a, like not a classical style, but it is a style of beer that doesn't actually taste like your, I would say, your common beer, like, you know, the IPAs, like the bitter beer, like all that other stuff. It's really not like that. So I would say if you're just not a regular beer drinker, that might be something that you can try. Milkshake IPAs, West Coast IPA, or not West Coast IPAs, New England IPAs, hazies, that might be up your alley. Because if that's kind of the thing that you would gravitate towards anyway, give it a shot, and you might like it.
I'll have to let you know. I'll have to let you know.
I'll bring one. If y'all are coming up to the expo, I will.
We are coming up.
I will bring something for you.
Thank you. Yes, we're coming. So yeah, I will hold you to that.
All right, I'll have something for you.
What's your favorite beer that you've made?
So the favorite beer that I've made is a pineapple IPA that actually won me my very first medal at the brewing competition we go to down in Cincinnati like every year. This is like 3 years ago. It was just like an experimental recipe that I came up with where I just add pineapple directly to the boil. So it's just like the whole thing is infused with it. Now I fucked up. And like I added just like so much pineapple that it just overshadowed everything else that I put in there.
Oh, so I like it.
I had a whole bunch of hops and other things to just like kind of make a swirl of like pineapple. And I think I added like I don't know, some stuff that would be like orange zest. And so you just get like this mix of fruit. I just added so much pineapple. That's all it tasted like. It's just pineapple. But it wound up, I mean, it looked good. Because of the grain bill that I used, like from a color and like a carbonation standpoint and all that jazz. But just like the little bit of hops that was able to shine through, plus the pineapple, it was just the best. Between that and the pumpkin ale that I make every year from like an actual pumpkin that I put in, and that's why Joey can't stand me, because I'll take an idea, and then just like turn that knob to the max and just like come up with just like wild shit to do like afterwards. Because like some folks will just be like, yeah, just get canned pumpkin or something, or you can even get pumpkin flavoring. I'm like, nah, fuck that. Just give me a whole pumpkin and I'll figure it out afterwards. And so yeah, but it's just stuff like that between the pumpkin ale and the pineapple IPA that I put together, those have got to be like my go-to recipes, especially around the pineapple IPA for this time of year. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so to those quick questions real quick. What I want to know, Chris, because you probably are an expert on Chris I. First football player you can think of with the first name Chris?
Chris Olave.
Okay. Wow. Look at that. What about the first one you can think of with the last name Allen?
Marcus Allen.
Okay. Well, there you go, guys. that's the big thing you were waiting for. But if you were so if you decided to do a podcast, kind of a podcast that wasn't fantasy football related, and you could have one celebrity co-host, what celebrity would you choose, and what would the podcast be about?
Oh, that's a good question. So who celebrity guest on it? To be quite honest, and this is not to be like super political or anything like that, but I would love to have somebody like no, take that back. No. Okay, so this is a toughie. No, take that back. I know who I want. I want Stephen A. Smith.
Okay.
I want him just because that man can carry a conversation, but it goes back to like what we were talking about earlier, where when you talk about things and you want to set up like the person that you're talking with so that they can kind of go off on their own thing. I think Stephen A. like does that in such a way that it makes folks mad, so that when they are talking, they are energetic. They are kind of like, you can almost see it, because anytime that he goes on one of his rants, the person on the other side of the desk is almost like, you know, eyes wide. They're almost like starting to sweat too, because they're so mad at what he's saying that they're ready to fire back at him with the quickness.
Yeah.
So I think like in a more controlled environment, I think he would provide that type of energy and that discussion and that debate that almost like that makes folks want to like tune in almost every week. It could be a train wreck, it might not be, but you always know with somebody like that, like they are creating that type of atmosphere for folks to kind of, to go back and forth. It's not just a Q&A. Like I've never watched any show with him on there thinking that this was an interview.
Yeah.
Like, no, this is a conversation with a number of people. And that's always the thing that I would want to try and strive for, like whenever I had a show.
I mean, perfection, because that's exactly, and I think that would be a fun show to, get to check out. So maybe we can get that to happen down the road. Chris, it's been so awesome being able to talk to you and catch up and everything. I mean, it's great. So can you just let everybody that's listening know where they can find you and all the stuff you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. My quote unquote like home is 4for4 football. You can find most of my off-season work, whether it be best ball content, player evaluation. Most of my off-season content will be there at 4for4 football. I'm also doing some off-season work over at Football Guys as well. And then once the season starts, you'll probably see me at like a NBC Sports Edge, maybe one or two other places. I also work with the folks over at ETR. So I kind of bounce around with some of the folks that I know. So, but yeah, find me on Twitter there, Chris Allen, FFWX.
That is excellent. Everybody go check out Chris and check out all of his work, and make sure to tune in to the next episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem whenever that comes out. We'll see you next time, and remember to stay rad.